You're waiting in line. Someone cuts in front of you. Blatant. Obvious. You say, "Hey, there's a line." They turn around. So what? You gonna do something about it? You should push back. Hold your ground. But something happens that's completely outside your control. Your throat closes. Your mind goes utterly blank. You stand there silent or mumble something pathetic. They smirk and stay put. Everyone saw you fold. Hours later, lying in bed, your brain explodes with perfect responses, exactly what you should have said, and the familiar shame arrives. This probably isn't just line cutters. Your parent criticizes you and you go mute. Your partner raises their voice and words vanish. A friend crosses a boundary and you say, "It's fine," when it's not. Same pattern every time. Freeze, blank, fold. Perfect responses hours later. Always too late. Why? Turns out something very specific is happening in your body that makes responding in that moment neurologically impossible. But what system is making this decision for you? Your autonomic nervous system runs constantly in the background. It manages everything you don't consciously think about: heart rate, breathing, threat detection, your biological security system. And it operates on 3 alert levels. When everything's safe, you're in green zone, social engagement mode. Your face is expressive, your voice has its natural melody, your thinking brain is fully online. You can process what's happening, find the right words, set boundaries if you need to. When danger shows up, you shift to yellow alert, fight or flight. Your heart's racing, muscles are tense, but you're still operational. You could argue, push back, defend yourself if you had to. But when your system perceives overwhelming threat with no way out, it drops to red alert. Freeze, complete immobilization, shutdown. This is where you go when that person cuts in line. So what exactly happens when you hit red alert? In freeze, everything slows down. Your heart rate drops, blood pressure lowers, your face goes blank. If you can speak at all, your voice loses its rhythm. Your throat physically constricts. Time starts to distort and emotions go numb. And your thinking brain shuts down. Your prefrontal cortex handles working memory, language, planning, decision-making, everything you need for confrontations. But in red alert, stress chemicals called catecholamines flood your brain and actively switch off your prefrontal cortex. Executive control goes dark. Older, primitive parts take over. Amygdala handling fear, hypothalamus coordinating emergency response, pure survival circuits. When you need words, the equipment required is chemically offline. Hours later, the threat passed, chemicals cleared, prefrontal cortex rebooted. Now you have access to working memory, language, reasoning. But you couldn't in the moment. The hardware was unavailable. But who's deciding which alert level to activate? Your body makes this decision through neuroception, threat detection running below conscious awareness. Right now, your nervous system is scanning. Is the room safe? Any threatening sounds? If someone walked in, it would instantly assess their size, tone, facial expression, body language, authority markers. It's comparing everything to your database of past experiences. This happens in primitive brain structures, milliseconds, faster than thought. Based on what it detects, your system automatically selects which state to activate. You don't choose this. It's decided before you can decide. So what triggers this automatic shutdown? Freeze activates when your system detects overwhelming threat plus no viable escape. Maybe it's someone bigger or more aggressive than you, someone with power over you. Fighting back would make things worse. There are multiple threat cues coming at once: harsh voice, physical proximity, witnesses watching. And crucially, there's no perceived exit. You can't just leave without looking even weaker. You can't physically overpower them. Fighting back would only escalate. You're trapped. Overwhelming threat plus no escape equals red alert. But why would your body have this response in the first place? 500 million years ago, freeze was a legitimate survival strategy. You're a small mammal. Predator catches you. Can't fight, too strong. Can't flee, caught. Third option, become utterly still. Play dead. Stop moving, stop making noise, disconnect from pain. Sometimes predators lose interest in prey that stops struggling. This response is ancient, automatic, hardwired. Every vertebrate does this. But the system designed for predators now fires at criticism. Your body cannot distinguish between a physical threat to your life and a social threat to your sense of self. To your nervous system, aggressive confrontation can register with the same alarm intensity as a predator attack. Why does this happen, especially with authority figures? Authority figures trigger freeze especially effectively. Anyone who has power over you. Your nervous system runs through its assessment. Can I fight this person? No, they have power over me. The consequences would be severe. Can I flee? No, I'm trapped in this situation. Overwhelming threat with no escape. But it compounds. Hierarchies are evolutionarily ancient. Your nervous system has circuits designed to recognize power differentials and respond with submission. Each time you freeze in similar situations, you strengthen that neural pathway. Your system learns. Next confrontation, freeze activates faster, deeper. It becomes automatic. What if your freeze is rooted in something deeper? If freeze is rooted in trauma, situations where you genuinely were overwhelmed with no escape, your nervous system's threat detection has been recalibrated. The threshold for triggering freeze becomes much lower. Your neuroception stuck on high alert, seeing threats that aren't there, responding to the past, not the present. For trauma survivors, specialized treatment is essential. Somatic experiencing, EMDR, trauma-informed approaches. What we'll discuss helps, but trauma needs professional support. So can you actually change this? Yes. Here's what you're changing. Your neuroception operates on a database of past experiences. Every freeze adds evidence. This situation is overwhelming. Shut down. That database gets stronger. But neuroplasticity works both ways. You can build a new database that competes with the old one. This requires 4 interconnected approaches working simultaneously. Think of them as 4 different tools you're using to rewire the same system. Each one attacks the problem from a different angle. How do you change what your brain classifies as threatening? The first tool is reprogramming threat recognition itself. Your limbic system pattern matches situations to stored threats. When it recognizes similarity to past freeze situations, red alert. You can retrain this. The principle? Repeated exposure to threat cues in safe contexts teaches your limbic system to reclassify them. Life-threatening becomes uncomfortable but manageable. This isn't visualization. Studies using fMRI show reduced amygdala activation after retraining. Your threat detector literally recalibrates. Start by naming your triggers explicitly. Authority figures, critical tones, aggressive body language, whatever sets you off. You're teaching your conscious brain to recognize what your unconscious is reacting to. Then comes controlled exposure in safe contexts. You might practice assertive responses when you're alone, or record yourself speaking firmly and listen back. Watch videos of confrontations. The key is to activate your threat recognition system without triggering full freeze. Then stay in that activated state until your nervous system realizes nothing bad is actually happening. Most people who freeze have terrible interoception. That's awareness of your internal state. They don't notice early signs until locked up. Train yourself to catch it earlier. Learn what your body actually does as freeze starts. Heart rate changes, muscle tension building up, breathing shifting. That window between starting to activate and completely frozen is where you have leverage. This takes consistent practice over weeks to months. That's how neuroplasticity works, but changes are real. People report freeze activating less frequently, catching it earlier, recovering faster. Can you teach your brain that confrontation isn't always dangerous? The second tool is fear extinction through exposure. 50 years of research proves this works, but most people implement it wrong. They jump to the hardest situation. System floods, freeze worse. They conclude it doesn't work. Here's the mechanism. You're not erasing the fear memory. Can't. It's permanent. You're building a new, stronger memory that competes with it. Confrontation doesn't always equal danger. Sometimes I can handle this. This new memory forms under specific conditions. Activate fear response moderately, not overwhelming. Stay in that state long enough for your brain to realize the feared outcome doesn't occur. Repeat until the new memory becomes dominant. Map your triggers by intensity. Rate them 0 to 100. Start with 20 to 30. Not trivial, need activation, but not overwhelming, need to stay engaged. Expose yourself until your system learns they're manageable. Progress when a 30 rates 10. The critical technique here is something called inhibitory learning. During exposure, you actively notice what's different. Throat tight, but I can still speak. Heart racing, but thinking clearly. Scared, but nothing bad happening. You're teaching your prefrontal cortex to stay online during activation. Building a new pathway. Activation doesn't require shutdown. Vary the context, different people, settings, variations. You want generalization. I can handle confrontations, period, not just one specific scenario. How do you make your system more stress-resistant? The third tool is building autonomic flexibility, raising how much stress your system handles before dropping into freeze. This is about something called vagal tone, your vagus nerve's regulatory capacity. Higher vagal tone equals greater resilience. Heart rate variability training is direct. HRV, that's heart rate variability, measures vagal tone. It tracks the variation in time between heartbeats, which reflects how well your nervous system shifts states. Higher HRV equals better flexibility. Train through biofeedback, real-time monitoring while you practice techniques that increase HRV. Your nervous system learns what high vagal tone feels like. Research shows measurable increases after weeks of practice. Controlled stress exposure. Brief, intense stressors followed by recovery train your system to bounce back faster. Cold exposure is most studied. Cold water activates sympathetic, hard, but you control it. You can exit. Your nervous system learns. High activation doesn't always mean danger. I can handle this. I can recover. After weeks, the system becomes more flexible, activates appropriately, deactivates faster. Freeze threshold raises. Extended exhale breathing directly activates your vagus nerve. Breathing in shorter than breathing out. But the deeper mechanism, you're training voluntary control of an involuntary system. That metacognition, awareness you can influence physiology, itself increases flexibility. Safe social connection trains autonomic flexibility. Your nervous system co-regulates with others. Time with safe people trains your system that social engagement is possible. This is neurobiology. Isolation maintains hypervigilance. Connection builds flexibility. What if your freeze is about perceived status? The fourth tool targets something different, perceived hierarchy. Your freeze response is partly driven by where you think you stand in social dominance structures. Your brain constantly assesses, am I dominant or subordinate here? This runs on accumulated feedback. Every freeze reinforces, I'm subordinate. Every successful boundary reinforces, I can be dominant. Self-reinforcing loop. Subordinate behavior triggers submissive circuits, which produce more subordinate behavior. Dominance versus subordination shows up in measurable behaviors. Eye contact patterns. Subordinates break contact first. Voice tone. Subordinates speak with questioning inflection, turning statements into questions. Physical space. Subordinates make themselves physically smaller. Response timing. Subordinates respond immediately to demands instead of pausing. You can train opposite behaviors as feedback that recalibrates your system. Hold eye contact just slightly longer than feels comfortable. Speak in statements instead of questions. Take up physical space. Pause before you respond instead of jumping to answer immediately. Done consistently in low-stakes situations, this creates feedback. I'm behaving dominantly and nothing bad happens. Your nervous system reclassifies your position. Status signals matter here. Your nervous system is constantly reading them. Height, voice pitch, posture, how quickly you respond. These all feed directly into your threat assessment system. So stand a bit taller. Lower your voice tone slightly. Maintain an open posture instead of making yourself small. Respond deliberately instead of reactively. These signals influence your neuroception and others' behavior. Studies show people treated as higher status begin displaying higher status behavior. Feedback works both ways. Deepest level, your internal narrative about hierarchy position. If your narrative is, I'm lower status, ambiguous interactions get interpreted as threatening. Neutral faces look hostile. Normal requests feel like demands. Freeze threshold drops. Changing this requires contradictory evidence. Successful confrontations, positive feedback, boundary holding that's respected. This is why exposure matters beyond fear extinction. You're collecting data that rewrites your status narrative. So how do these four tools work as a system? These four approaches work synergistically. Threat recognition reprogramming changes what your brain classifies as dangerous. Fear extinction builds competing memories. Autonomic training raises baseline resilience. Hierarchy recalibration changes how power dynamics trigger your system. None of this works instantly. Neuroplasticity requires weeks to months of consistent practice, but changes are real and measurable. Build awareness of your internal state. Notice when activation starts. Track situations that used to trigger freeze but don't anymore. Watch your threshold move. For exposure, plan practice with situations rated 20 to 30. Small disagreements, minor boundaries, low-stakes confrontations. Stay engaged while activated. Notice your system calms without catastrophe. Increase difficulty only when previous level activation drops significantly. Progress won't be linear. You'll have setbacks. The old pathway exists. You're building a stronger, competing pathway. If freeze is rooted in trauma, work with specialists. If you have cardiovascular issues, talk to doctors before cold exposure or intense breathing. If you have severe anxiety, combine this with appropriate treatment. What does understanding freeze tell us about human behavior? Understanding freeze explains way more than just line cutters. It explains why trauma survivors often don't fight back during assault. Their body made that decision in milliseconds before conscious choice was even possible. It explains why you shut down during arguments, why public speaking triggers freeze, why people freeze around authority figures. Power dynamics trigger ancient responses. When challenging someone activates red alert, speaking up becomes neurologically difficult, not just socially risky. But these are trainable systems. Your nervous system adapted to past experiences. It can adapt to new ones. Freeze made sense evolutionarily, kept your ancestors alive when they faced actual predators in the jungle. But modern social world has different threats. Your body is still responding as if aggressive people are leopards. The wiring is the same, but the threats have changed. You can recalibrate it. Not overnight, not without consistent effort, but systematically. Reprogram threat recognition, build new neural pathways, increase autonomic flexibility, change how you perceive hierarchy. Your perfect responses don't have to wait until hours later. They can show up in the moment. Not because you forced them, but because your nervous system learned to stay online when challenged. Next time you freeze, you'll recognize what's happening. System-detected threat, assessed as overwhelming with no escape, activated protective circuitry, shut down prefrontal cortex, all in milliseconds. That's biology, and now you know how to change it.